Hello, and welcome to the Philosopher's Compass podcast. I am your host, Meredith Alexander Coons, and this podcast focuses on practical philosophy and how we use the wisdom of philosophical ideas in our everyday lives to create more meaning and purpose. Today, I'm really lucky to have as my guest Benny Voncken, and he is the co-founder of Via Stoica and Via Stoica Podcast. In fact, I've made an appearance on his podcast myself, which I really enjoyed. And his group offers life coaching from a Stoic perspective, corporate training, motivational speaking, workshops to help people live better lives through creating and applying their philosophy of life, mainly based on Stoicism. He is from the Netherlands, and he's lived abroad for about 15 years. After teaching, he decided to focus on Stoicism and coaching to improve his life and then help other people. So he's really a great guest for me to have because this is really the focus of this podcast. You can definitely find him online through Via Stoica on YouTube, on X, and he also has his own part of the website on Via Stoica with his name. So Benny, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited for this conversation, and it's well, we meet here again online. Well, we met in person in August. Was it August or July? No, end of July, beginning of August.
June. It was June in
June,
Athens.
yeah, that's right.
So it's awesome to see you again online, but it was very, very fun to have you as part of our seminar that focused on Beyond Stoicism and Live Like a Philosopher with Massimo Pigliucci. I was so glad to see you there. Yeah.
Oh, that was amazing, and such a good seminar as well. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you so much. It was also really good because the people who joined, like yourself, like everyone was so engaged and interested, and it's just amazing to meet people in the practical philosophy world who just want to share these ideas and want to dig deeper. So along those lines, the first kind of question I had for you is, could you share how you got interested in philosophy and Stoicism in particular?
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think for some people, this kind of goes on to similar lines. It's usually when you are not on your peak moments, but it was when I was dealing with some difficult things like marriage ending, the divorce, and dealing with alcohol and all of that stuff. So I needed more of a guide. And I wasn't really much of a reader, but luckily I had a really good friend during that period of time, and he gave me some books, and I started with fiction, science fiction. I love that stuff. But then I moved on to some serious books and some serious works, and that's where the philosophy came. And we started talking about all of that, all of the philosophical side and just thinking about life. And that really helped me get through that period very well, actually better than I expected. It took a long time, which it normally takes, I guess, but it was really helpful and beneficial. And if I look back now and see even before all of those things, how I am right now, and before I, was going on this philosophical journey, my life has just changed so much for the better, which is in all aspects of life. So it's so beneficial.
That's really awesome. Did you start with ancient texts or did you start with modern interpretations, or kind of what got you started?
Well, one of the books because at one point during that conversation with my friend, I kind of diagnosed myself with an existential crisis. It's like, yeah, this is, something is not right here. So I looked at this book called Introduction into Existentialism, and this writer Olson, he had many of the, different philosophies, like what you had in Beyond Stoicism, but this was more towards the existential, like Camus, Sartre. But the Stoics also showed up there, and that was just instantly is like, wow, this is me, right? And that's when I really dove in, and I just went in full force, and I started with the Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, but then also books from Donald Robertson and Massimo Pigliucci and William Irvine. They really gave the contextual, they made it all real to me. So kind of that mix, but I loved and I still have I travel a lot, and I always carry Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca with me because they are really the core of the reading, and I just really enjoy reading them and just getting their wisdom in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's really interesting. A lot of people I've spoken to first somehow got interested in or involved with existentialism. And
Hmm.
then that somehow led to more interest in philosophy, and then eventually sometimes to ancient philosophy and to Stoicism. And that's kind of my path too, in the sense that when I was a student in high school, I got really interested in existentialism, and I read a lot of Camus and some Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir and other people. And I was also really interested in French culture, French history and language. So that also helped me go sort of a gateway into that. But at some point, it wasn't really enough for me to build a worldview on that I felt satisfied with. And then, of course, as you said, like we all have our own personal crises, and a crisis I felt was, how do I be the best parent and mom I could be for kids, where I have so much responsibility to try to give them a good life and help them just flourish, right? So
Hmm.
that between those two things, I started looking, and then I made my way to Stoicism, and haven't really quite looked back, because I do think it resonates so deeply. I mean, do you remember anything that really resonated you when you first read it? Like you came across it in the book and you're like,
Well, one of the things is I've always been fascinated by Roman history. So I loved
mm-hmm.
going to Rome. And after having read these books and then going, like, so even when you read like Cicero and Seneca, and then you go back to Rome, and even with Marcus Aurelius, you just look at the city from a completely different perspective. And I love watching like archaeological shows and these things. So I've always been captured by that side of history. And then when you get to read, like, that's why Marcus Aurelius, the Meditations, is so impactful, because it has so many different layers on like you can see this emperor is that personal diary, right? You can see the struggles that he's facing with as a human being, but also as someone who's trying to keep that empire together, right? And all the struggles that he was facing. So yeah, for me that was the biggest thing, just to kind of like, wow, this is a and the wealth of information that is available on that time of the history of humankind, right? It's been documented so well, and these texts that unfortunately not as many, but they still survive. But for me, it was when I was reading Marcus Aurelius and some quotes that really stuck out and that I could just apply to life directly. That showed me, wow, there's something extra here. There's something that I can actually use, and it isn't this abstract kind of thinking. And because I think that that's what a lot of people have with philosophy.
Yeah,
If you ask people, like I have friends, and they just tell me, Benny, please don't even start. No, there's no,
no
really like
philosophy required.
yeah, they just think it's like this, this floaty and thing. But then when I tell them, it's like, wow. But like, for example, one of the things that really showed me was a quote by Marcus Aurelius, and I am not very good at remembering things verbatim, but it goes, um, you know, that person is bound to act that way. It's like getting angry at a fig tree for secreting juice. And by the way, soon you'll both be dead, and then soon forgotten. Which I love that part. The
Right.
existentialism and part is like,
Yeah.
okay, I love that. But I was working in a school at that time, and in Dubai, and different situation, right? Different culture, dealing with
Mm,
people, teachers from different cultures and the parts of the world. And one teacher particularly, he was just frustrating. He was playing these games, and he was always just aggravating me, and I was getting angry or frustrated. And after I read that quote, I looked at it and I thought about it, and I was like, yeah, I can't change him. He's gonna
mhm.
do the exact same thing that he's gonna do it every day, or whatever he feels like doing. But it's up to me to approach it differently. And I remember the next day I went to school, and he came up to me with some of his tricks or whatever he was doing, and I felt an immediate distance between myself and him. And I was like, wow, I'm observing this right now from a completely different angle. It's like I can't change him. I can decide whether his words aggravate me or whether they frustrate me or not. And then I have choices, right? I can walk away, I can give feedback, I can listen, I can do whatever the situation requires, but I don't have to let it annoy me. And that was
Right.
like, when I saw that and when I realized, it's like, wow, this is such a profound knowledge of human psyche and how we work and how we tick. And it's like, what else is there? So that's when but then you read it from a completely different mindset. You read it not just from, okay, what is this philosophy? What is it saying? But it's also, what does it mean to me, and how can it help me?
Yeah. I think it's interesting about Marcus Aurelius too, because when you read the Meditations, it's really like watching his mind at work.
Hmm.
And I love that, because I'm always fascinated by the mind and even, neuroscience and other things like that. But just the idea that he was thinking these thoughts so long ago, but that he had such a clear-eyed view of human nature that we can still relate to today, and we can relate to his struggles of dealing with these difficult people, which you can only imagine must have been like so hard as the emperor of the Rome, of Rome. Like, oh my gosh, it's like the talk about the responsibility involved, and then this idea that we can kind of cope with our own sense of what can we really change, what can we really be sort of the manager of, and we cannot change how somebody else comes around and tries to play office politics or something like that. We just so you gave a very good example of that. How else do you use Stoic concepts in your own everyday life?
Well, every day I try to, because that's a good thing about life. And I think especially when we look at an example of Marcus Aurelius, because he was groomed to be the emperor from a young age, right?
Yes.
But if he didn't have a choice of what to become or what to do. And I feel like we are often kind of projected in a similar way in life, where we are from a child, we have this this trajectory that we have to follow. You have to go to school, you have to do this, you have to get a job, you have to get a family, car, house, all of these, you have to tick all of these boxes. And for me personally, that that's why, for example, the divorce was such a liberating thing, because I was ticking all those boxes, and suddenly the next one wasn't available anymore. I was like, oh, it's actually kind of liberating, because I don't
Mm,
have to follow it anymore. But even and what Stoicism teaches me in this sense, and especially the example of Marcus Aurelius, is that even if you are in a certain path that you can't choose, right? Because there are restrictions to life. It's not like we have to make money to a certain amount. We have certain social responsibilities, and that's a big part of Stoicism as well. But even among that, you can still live the life that you can still live a good and peaceful life. That's something that I find so strange of what our society is about. It's about showing how much you have and all the money, and that's why we put all this pressure on ourselves, which makes it difficult, for example, to put like coaching to the market or to people. Because if you sell, oh, if you coach with me, you can get a peaceful and calm life, and people's like, I don't want that. I want money. I want to know how to be successful. I want to know how to. So I think that was one of the biggest things, and one of when we talk about the three disciplines of Stoicism, that discipline of desire, that was one that I think a lot of people struggle with. But for me, that is one that continuously in my life I try to be more moderate of what I live, and I live a quite minimalistic lifestyle. But you see so many things popping up. It's like, oh, buy this, buy that, do he? So it is very difficult to resist. But in those aspects, it really shifted my view of what is important in life, and that's, I think, the biggest part that helped me prioritize what is truly important, instead of chasing all these things that we feel like we need to live the good life. Well, the good life is available for everyone. It's just that it's difficult to not want, to let go of those wants that we have.
right, right. I mean, to that point, how would you define a good life?
For me, it's a calm and peaceful life. It's peace of mind is so important, and I think people underestimate that. And for me, the good life is, and that's why when people ask me, like, how do you know that you are doing the right thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's very difficult. It's like, oh, do you know the moral ethics? How do you know the right choice? For me, that compass that I use, and that's why I like your, the title of your podcast, The Philosopher's Compass. The compass that I use is whether something gives me peace of mind. I can
Mm,
project, like, if I make a certain decision,
right.
obviously you don't know the outcomes completely, but at least if it gives me certain peace of mind, or if I feel some kind of friction, I was like, there's something off here. I need to pause. I need to think a little bit more. So that is, for me, a truly good life is where you can just be content, and happy and grateful for the things that you have in the present moment. Then you can. It doesn't really matter what the circumstances are around it. Then you can still be happy. That doesn't, that's easier said than done.
Right,
When you
right,
say
right,
these things,
right.
it's like, okay, do this, and then you'll be fine. But it does help, and it does. You can make progress on it incrementally, and I think that's where a lot of people struggle with applying something like this, because they only look at the bigger pictures, like, oh, I'm gonna be calm, but I don't see myself being in that state. But if you can show them you can do it incrementally, little by little, you can tell the differences there, then that makes it a little bit easier for people to see that it's actually a path to living that good life.
Hmm. It makes me think of the inner daimon that was
Mm.
recognized by the Stoics and by Socrates and others, that there's kind of this inner genius, sometimes they called it, that was our sort of our guide, our inner character kind of speaking to us, our maybe our soul or something. I mean, I'd like to, that's a concept I'd like to understand better. But I think when you're talking about, how do you figure out what the path is, you are kind of asking your inner daimon, it sounds like, in a way, right? Like what, as opposed to taking in the received messages of, advertising or one's neighbors, like, oh, I have to compete with them or I have to buy this thing. I find that a huge struggle in our times. I mean, for me personally too, it's a struggle because we're constantly inundated with a lot of messages. If you do, go online or look at things in our culture like movies and so on, it's these are the Stoic messages and the simple life are not really being valued out there.
No, and especially like when you talk about the inner diamond and the goal of Stoicism being that eudaimonic, and that people often translate it to happiness, but I prefer the good the good character state or the good spirit state, because that is also more of that guide. Because I want to do the things that make me have a better character and soul. And how do you do that? Is to be good with yourself, but also to be, again, pro-social, to have, to be good for the people around you. And I think especially in times like this, it is more and more needed for that. But that's
Hmm.
where people go wrong, as you said, because we get so many impulses or input from the world around us that show us like, oh, if you do this, then you can live a good life, right? If you accumulate all of these things, then you will be good. Or if or to live a good life, you necessarily have to give away stuff. No, just be, try to be the best person that you can be in the situation that you're in, and that will help you feel better about yourself, and that sets the right example. But people, and I think that that's one of the interesting things that Epictetus talks about when he says, like, you forget the most important part of what you have to really take care of, and that is your soul, that is your character. And that's what the Stoics hammer on, and a lot of people find that difficult, right? Because that means that you have to put yourself on a very strict lens all the time, which is pretty impossible to follow that example, but we have an obligation to try, at least, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. We need to try, and I think we can make progress, as you said,
Hmm.
progress towards kind of the Stoic virtues, wisdom, justice, courage, moderation, or self-control. I mean, I think these are things you could measure all your actions on somehow, or all your decisions on. Are you actually living up to those virtues? How how would you say you use or think about the virtues in your life?
I probably should be thinking a little bit more about them, especially temperance. That's something for me that is, struggling, especially with food. And then I know in my mind is like I don't need it, and then I just, I so those there's a lot of work for me still to be done in those things. But there, I think, with wisdom, for example, I love the concept of being curious, and that's something that I've always had, and I try to cultivate a little bit more, because people ask, like, how can you, be more wise, more experiences, but also to be open minded for what's around you. And curiosity is a big part of that. So I try to ask questions, especially when you're doing coaching, you want to ask questions without judgment. And that's something that I think will give you more of the wisdom. So I try to cultivate those as much as possible. Courage as well, because when you know what the right thing to do is, doing it is then the next step. And that's sometimes where I was a people pleaser a long time, and still am. It's
Mm,
something that I want to have other people around me feel comfortable, but that sometimes goes at the cost of me doing the things that I should be doing. And sometimes it is more important to set the boundaries than to do something that you might not really want. But that takes courage, and that's something that, I'm still practicing and trying to do. So they all come together all the time, and I should be more aware of them. But in certain moments, they do kind of hit you and say, okay, now this is what you're supposed to be doing, now do it. Or what is just to do here, and for
right,
yourself and
right.
for the people around you. So I think it is For me, it's just fascinating how those minds back in the day came up with, these virtues and saying, okay,
Mm.
these are the four ones. I would have loved to be on that table and just think about it. It's like, okay, well, which one should we choose? How are we going to do this?
Right.
I love to kind of be in those conversations.
Yeah, and there's also the concept that all of these virtues are really sort of facets of the same thing. They're all
Mm,
interrelated, and this was also a key part of some Greek philosophies, including what kind of Socrates and Plato had said. Well, it's hard to separate out who's when you talk about Plato writing about Socrates, but yeah, I mean, I think there's once you start to parse out a specific action and what was good about it, many times you'll see that it's because of all of these virtues coming together, and they kind of found a really cool way, I think, of just showing us those facets. I have found the virtue aspect to be really, really helpful for me in thinking about how do I make choices. Because when I first discovered Stoicism as a way of life, or as a way of philosophy of life, I kind of was uncertain really how to apply it, aside from the idea of there's some things that are up to me and there's some things that are not, which is very important. I also have a tendency to people please, and also a tendency to become over responsible for certain things, and then I take it all onto myself, and oh gosh, why is life so exhausting? Oh, because of that. So thinking about, well, actually sometimes you need the courage for someone not to be happy with your decision because it's the right thing to do, or you need the fairness to say, okay, we're going to lift up, these voices instead of just going with what's easier. And those people always speak up, so there's just so many fascinating things about this. Is there any other kind of aspects of the virtues that you'd like to share about? I mean, I'm curious about kind of how you use those in your coaching, if you do.
Yeah, and I use them because in some ways the coaching is also a mirror to yourself, because you are looking at it from your own lens. But I'm trying to really not to do that and not to judge. I think that that's one of the biggest things to do and to use the virtues with, is to keep it as objective as possible. And for me, the understanding and the use of them is to create more awareness of what's actually going on, and to live more in the moment, to really try to kind of dissect it, what's going on. And even to when I coach people, it's to look at what they're experiencing, for example the wisdom, to really see what is happening there and try to delve in and help them discover what they are looking for, and to create that awareness, to help them kind of cultivate those virtues in themselves and see where the pain points are. And I think that that's a really good system of having these four concepts of one bigger whole, because um, it is kind of, yeah, it's a little bit difficult to understand for people when you say, oh, you've got to be virtuous. And that's why when you kind of have the four ones, it's a little bit easier to dissect. And some people, they do struggle with one more than the other.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's really a good tool to create that more awareness. And by doing so, it already kind of changes your outlook on what's happening around you, because I'm a big proponent of that pause, that moment where you just kind
Mm.
of take a step back. And when you have a framework like the virtues to help you kind of dissect what's going on, okay, what wisdom do I have, can I tap into here, have I experienced this before, or is there something new, what do I need to learn? And then with the justice, the courage, and temperance, all of them together, you can dissect it a little bit better and see what's really required of you, and where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, and what you can use to deal with that moment. So for me, yeah, again, they all kind of come together, but in certain moments something else requires, as you said, when someone needs to have their voice heard more, then justice needs to come together to have that person the platform, and they need to have the courage. But I would also have the courage to either take my voice or their other voice. So it is something that is quite interesting if you really think about it. And then if you kind of, you know and I'm not saying I'm not a big meditator, but if you kind of meditate on your day and think about what's happened and where your knowledge lacked, because we do jump to conclusions, I do, and that's something where you can then learn from. So, okay, especially now in a day of age with AI, with those videos and
Mm.
everything you see. So it is good to learn from that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we all have some inherent bias at
Mm,
some scale, because there's hundreds of biases that, and it's not like we're going to eliminate them. We just have to kind of be aware of them, become aware of them, and then this is building that kind of awareness. Yeah, I love that pause. um I know I also was trained in coaching, and I got certified as a coach at the beginning of this year after training for a couple of years. And I think it's such a great thing to pursue, to help others. And as you said, hold a mirror up to ourselves. I'd love it if you could share a little bit about your coaching.
Yeah, so whenever people, because it's kind of a new concept, Stoic coaching, people ask like, "What is it?" And not a lot of people know about it. And it is, first you get a coach who is experienced with Stoicism. So that's for me as a coach, it really helps me to again be objective and to use the knowledge and the techniques and the the practices whenever someone who I work with requires it in that moment. But I do get different kind of people to work with. Some people are more interested in Stoic philosophy. They really want to know more about it, the specifics, and what to read and how to really delve into it deeper. And other people, they are not really that keen on knowing the specifics, but they do know that the techniques work. Or we just have, I do a free consultation, and when there is a good connection and it works, and then I integrate exercises, techniques, and I give them something to read if they want to or not. But I think that that's where Stoic philosophy really gives a good foundation as a coach, because there's so much to fall back on, but it also gives you the flexibility to use what the coaches need, what the coachees need. So for me, that's where it's kind of the two different sides of Stoic coaching. Where at one point it's a little bit more of like, well, let's go into the philosophy itself, and other people are more, okay, I want to build, I want to work on some issues that I'm dealing with, and the Stoic framework really helps. And they don't really necessarily need to know that what kind of exercises, like the labels, oh, memento mori, or let's practice some negative visualization. And I think that that's also, as having been a teacher, it's always this kind of interaction between the two sides, right? Because when I was a teacher, they had like, "Oh, this is the best teacher in the world." It's like that's impossible to say, because it's always this interaction between the student and the teacher, and the same
Mm.
with the coach and the coachee. So for me, it's kind of being able to be flexible, using the knowledge that I have about the philosophy, and then seeing what is required there, and then also finding out the best way to not necessarily explain it, but to make sure that they can implement it or see how it can work without, depending on the level of knowledge that they need about it. But
Hmm.
I think, and Stoicism has so many tools and exercises to tap into. It's incredible to see how that helps. And having had the personal experiences in many aspects, that really provides that, at least what I think and have seen in my practices, that it helps give that extra level of the confidence that these exercises work.
Are your exercises directly inspired by ancient sources, or do you design your own exercises?
Both. For example, with the circles of Hierocles, I made them into like a Venn diagram, and then have people like, talk about role ethics, virtue ethics, what the relationship is. So if you have the self and the immediate family, then there's the Venn diagram overlap. It's like, what roles and responsibilities do you have to yourself, but that also overlaps to the next level, and then maybe even to nature in general. Yeah, I like to, again, having had the teacher experience, I like to work and make these exercises and play around with them. But then again, the original sources and their techniques are so powerful that, even in CBT, you can see that they use many of them. So a lot of the times it's the questions like, why change things that work very well? But then again, you kind of need to adapt it to the people that you work with. So it also depends on the phrasing and how you bring it, and that kind of yeah, that
Yeah.
requires a little bit more flexibility.
Do you have any sort of go-to favorite um, Stoic or Stoic inspired exercises that you think can benefit lots of people?
One that I like, and it was I think it was in How to Be Stoic by Massimo Pigliucci, and also the Guide to the Good Life, is the otherizing. I think that that's something that we could use a little bit more now in the world, and something that I try to do as much as I can, to put yourself in the shoes of other people. But also, when and this is something, that it's always good to do. But the exercise is really like, if you're going through a hard time, just think about what you would say to someone else if they were going through something similar, and then try to tell that to yourself. So if you're going through a difficult time, what advice would you give to someone else if they were going through something similar? And then would you be able to accept that advice yourself as well? Because that takes you out of those difficult moments, and again, look at it from a different angle, and that can help a little bit better, because we are so good at giving advice to people around us, but if we have to give the same advice to ourselves, then yeah, it's a completely different story. So there are definitely those techniques that I like. And then you have the negative visualization, but as you said, also the virtues. There's so many things that really use, and it kind of depends on the situation that you're dealing with. And I think, for example, the dichotomy of control is something that is obviously a flagship of Stoic philosophy. It's like, oh, what is Stoic philosophy? Yeah, what's in your control, what isn't? But there's so much more. The
Yeah.
three disciplines, I think that they should be highlighted far more. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that sometimes that's sort of the first thing people have heard about a
Mm,
Stoic approach, but then there is so much more. And also there's overlap with other approaches. What you were sharing really reminds me of self-compassion practices that are also, advocated by psychologists and meditation folks where, yeah, kind of remembering how would someone else react to this. And this is something I've said to my kids and to myself of, what would someone else say to someone in your situation. We get so wrapped up in our own heads and our own spiraling around in there. So it's really critical to bring that other perspective. And I think so much of what Stoic thinking brings is this perspective taking,
hmm
whether it's kind of like a view from above, like zooming up and saying, "Oh, well, what, what's it really, what's really going on here?" Or like, "What's it like from 10,000 feet?" It really doesn't matter that much, and there's just so much to dig into. I know there's differing beliefs on like what is a Stoic practice or not, which is also another interesting question. But I think there's a lot of things we can get practical benefit from just from experimenting with, even as, thought experiments and coaching experiments.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things that are important here is to really make sure that it's the people, or at least that I work with, also people listening and people trying to find their philosophy of life. I think that that's what I try to do with Via Stoic as well, is not necessarily turn people into Stoics, but to hopefully inspire them to find their own philosophy of life. Because I think everybody is on a unique journey, and a lot of the times when we read the self-help books, for me, many of them are are the way that one person found that they could make a better life, and it's like, oh, this is the way I found it, but that works for them, right, for their situation, not necessarily for yours. And the same thing with philosophy, with Stoic practices, that it might work for you in a certain way, but it might not work for me in a specific way. And that's the interesting thing with the coaching, is to find out what really works. And I think that that's the journey that we're all on, to try and figure out what works for me and what doesn't. And that's why when you read a lot of the Stoic books and they say, oh, the dichotomy of control, that's it, right? But then you have the other rising, they have the view from above. And for me, I think, the pause is one of the main things, and going back into the present. And a lot of people, they forget about that. It's like, oh, it's they don't realize that it is a very mindful philosophy, which is something that I think a lot of people can benefit from, taking
Yeah,
a little bit more of
totally.
a pause.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. I mean, I always talk with my family about the question your impressions
hmm
concept. Of course, you have to define impressions in the Stoic sense. It's not just like what the normal English word impressions might mean, but it's kind of that idea of, what are your senses and your thoughts and emotions telling you about this thing, but it might not be accurate, so you have to question it.
hmm
And I think that way of avoiding a knee-jerk response is so critical in our society, with kind of all these mass communications out there that are all about eliciting your knee-jerk response to something and making you feel a certain way and playing with your emotions and um, getting you to do the things that benefit them, but not necessarily benefit you. So we all can be kind of better humans in this sense of questioning our impressions with that pause. You stop and you think, is that what's really going on? Or what's actually happening here? As much of the facts as we can get or the truth that we can get, knowing that we're all humans in human bodies and we only have access to certain information. But I think that is super critical. And maybe that also appeals to me as someone who's been long interested in research and science and history, where, I like to think that there are actual facts and that we as humans can kind of look at what those facts might be and use that to inform us and inform our choices.
Yeah, we can at least do our best and try to figure out as best as possible what's actually going on. And then maybe later we find out that it wasn't the way we thought it
Right.
was, but then we have another shot at making it the best of it, and at least, and that's why I think a lot of people, they fight against these things because, for example, when we look at emotion, and I remember being in Athens with Donald Robertson, and we were having a conversation with other people, and I was kind of observing how staunchly they were defending their right to be angry. It's like, but I'm supposed to be angry. It's my right to be angry, right? And I'm thinking, okay, these are human emotions, because that's what people say. They're like, oh, these are human emotions. I'm supposed to have them. And it's like, not all human emotions are beneficial to us, right? It's better
Mm-hmm.
not to be. If you can choose to be angry or not, I would prefer not to be angry. And there's ways to work around that, or at least diminish it, and maybe even get rid of it in specific situations, or maybe entirely. Like, I've noticed from my practice of Stoicism that my anxiety levels have dropped considerably. I'm not as frustrated or angry anymore because, again, you use those techniques. You just take a pause. At the moment, just taking a deep breath already helps me to get out of that initial impulse and then see what's going on. And that's where people, at least from my perspective, I find that people find that difficult to comprehend and to accept that that's a possibility, because it's just easier, and they are more situated and habituated in the fact that, okay, this happens now, I'm supposed to be this, and that's
Mm-hmm.
okay. And
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
that's also like when I was reading Stoicism and Emotions by Margaret Graver, you can see that dynamic works there as well. It's like, okay, this has happened, and I normally react this way, and that's okay, and then I can do also this. So
Mm-hmm.
it is something that is difficult to break those habits in people's minds, to feel like this is the normal sequence of emotions and events if things happen. But that's where something like the pause is important, right? Because that
Yes.
impulsive emotion is something because you've told yourself that when this happens, I'm supposed to be this. But if you then look at it, it's like, okay, this has happened, but what has really happened? And do I need to be in this state, or can I deal with it in a more rational and reasonable way? And that's something that people struggle with more than not.
Oh, it's so true. I mean, it's like that phrase, look what you made me do,
Hmm.
People aren't I mean, unless they're threatening your life or whatever, they're not making you do things. And that's always used as an excuse for someone's outburst or, their violence or things that are just like bad things. And, you have to stop and question that. It's not just because someone behaves a certain way, it doesn't make you do this thing. And I think we've all had like toxic people we dealt with, and it's just, that's a certain way of thinking and behaving, and it's just very, very destructive to people and their relationships. So I think this becoming aware of these ideas, whether it's through Stoicism, whether it's through CBT or other related things that often stem from Stoicism, it's so helpful for people's mindset and they're dealing with their emotions. So I completely am on board with what you just shared. I'd love for you to talk about how you combine your knowledge of coaching with your knowledge of philosophy. I know you've already shared some of the techniques and exercises that you use, but how do you kind of work both into your relationships with your clients?
Yeah, it kind of goes naturally at one point, because when you speak to people, and it's also good to keep reading up on it. And I'm not a therapist, and I don't claim to be so, but I've been taking some CBT courses just to get kind of an idea of what's going on. And you read up on, obviously, Stoic text and everything, and the teachings, but also the coaching aspect. I think it is good to keep refreshing yourself and then you see that they kind of come in together. For example, with some of the coaching techniques is just to kind of really have my clients to be specific of what's going on, and then just keep asking the questions. But then on the other hand, it's also not necessarily trying to make a breakthrough, right? Because that I feel like, and especially at the beginning, and other coaches, you see that they are just so focused on trying to make that breakthrough question, right? They want to ask the perfect question so that I can help them. And again, that's not up to me, right? It's not my journey that I have to go through. It's for them. And I don't know at the end of the day what part of a session really was beneficial, that because my view is different. I might think like, oh, this was really important, and I get feedbacks. I know I really like this question. Wow, that really helped me so much. And so kind of letting that go of my, the self-acclaimed importance of my role as a coach. I'm more of a guide, and that's where both of them come into mind. Is the Stoic philosophy keeps me grounded, and sometimes even during a coaching session, I think it was, don't think you're so too important in this process, right? You're the guide. You need to listen to this person that you're talking to, give them your full attention, and then try to be curious and try to ask questions where you think there might be some friction, or where you need to go a little bit deeper. um, and that's where, as a Stoic coach, Stoic philosophy helps me a lot. I wish I'd known this philosophy when I was a teacher. Would have helped me a lot as well. But I felt like I
Yeah.
was already kind of applying some of the techniques. So
Yeah.
that kind of natural Stoic side is in me. That's why it spoke to
Right.
me as well, and that's why when
Yeah.
I read it on the paper, it's like, this is me. This is
Yeah.
the language that they speak is my language. And for example, one of my sisters, she's more into Wu Wei and Taoism, and we have really good conversations. But when she uses specific words, I'm kind of cringe. It's like, that doesn't appeal to me at all. And that's where you notice something like Stoicism, and whatever philosophy of life that anyone adheres to, is like, when it speaks to you, that's like when you find like, okay, this is it. This is really part of me, and that helps me in the coaching as well, because it's kind of, yeah, I don't know, it's more natural, I guess.
Right, right, right. It resonates with you, and then you bring it to your clients. And were you trained in any specific methodology of coaching?
I To be honest, I did a couple of coaching courses online. They were kind of mixing the methodologies.
Mm.
So I, not really specifically, but as I looked with as I grabbed the Stoic philosophy there as well, I kind of now over the time created my own methodology, if you will. But
Hmm.
yeah, I did a couple of specific ones. I looked at NLP and those kind of directions. But
Yeah.
I think one of the things that I try to do is to stay as closest to who I am as a person, and use my with those techniques, because I think it is important to have that background, to know what you're kind of doing, how to build up a process, a coaching process, and how to set the right goals, and how to do all of those things with the clients. But at the end of the day, the relationship between the coach and the client is, that's why when some people, I speak to them for the free consultation, and I say it's not a match. It's like, yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah,
That's how it
yeah.
works, and that's how it
It's
goes. And
it has to be a human relationship. There has to
yeah,
be some ability to communicate there, right?
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I was trained in the coactive coaching
mm,
method, and one of the things I liked about it is this idea that all humans are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, and we're
mm,
not there to fix them as coaches.
yeah,
We are just really there to help them bring that out of themselves and experience growth through these conversations and thinking about reflecting on themselves, really. And I think that the naturally creative, resourceful, and whole is really in line, well aligned with Stoicism, I think, because that is it. It's all coming kind of from within, whether you believe in a inner daimon, or whether you believe in like an inner spark of reason, or whatever it is. It's coming from you, and you also have to take responsibility for it. Look, wait, what you made me do is not a thing. I mean, so we have to be clear that how are we going to really take responsibilities for our actions and our decisions, but also at the same point in time, recognize there's only certain things that are up to us, and we're not in charge of all the rest of that. So just kind of keep going forward with this mindset. And I think that has brought a lot to my coaching,
Hmm.
Because when I first started coaching, I had the same thing where I have to craft the perfect question and somehow I have to really help this person. And then I realized I was just trying to do things I shouldn't really be trying to do with coaching. That's not really coaching anymore. Maybe it's mentorship, maybe it's management, whatever, but it's not really what coaching should be. Thoughts?
No, I think that that's wonderful, and as you said, one of the things that when I speak to people, it feels like they've created a cocoon around that creative part of the bubble, where they have these beliefs, and they feel like this is the way I should be living. And especially when I speak to, for example, people who are more affluent, who have more things, and they feel like this is what gives me my identity and my self worth, and they really put it into the external. And then when I asked them, I was like, okay, but how do you feel, or as a person, like, how do you feel about this, or what does it actually give you, or how would you define that identity that this external gives it to you? And what if it's gone, right? To kind of really delve into it. And that's where I I just, and this is what I've noticed with teaching as well. What one-on-one teaching is like, my curiosity kind of takes over. And sometimes when I do like interviews for my podcast, I have a whole list of questions, but then something comes up, it's like, oh, I want to know more about this. And that's where I think that breaking that cocoon and having people see and asking those questions, and maybe more of like that Socratic method, is where you really dive into like, okay, what are we talking about specifically here, and where do we want to go? And for me, when you see people kind of open up and release that self of that part of themselves where they can be free, and they feel like, okay, I was kind of shackled by all of these things, and now I can pursue my own life. And it isn't like you're going to flip the switch and move everything around directly, but you can start making decisions towards that better goal. And I think that that's part of, like, as a coach, you don't, because I don't know what their direction in life should be or is, and that's not up to me. That's for them to discover. And that's where you have to kind of keep that barrier, as you said. Otherwise, you become more of a mentor, and a mentor is, in my opinion, someone who's more trying to lead you towards what they are doing. And while a coach is like, no, you need to find yourself, and I can help you by mirroring your behaviors, your thoughts to yourself, so you can look at it from a different angle.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I really like that approach. Have you learned lessons from coaching that you have also applied to your philosophy?
Yeah, one of the biggest parts is that I've realized in moments that I feel like a hypocrite, because then and especially when you go on a podcast and you talk about the philosophy, and then sometimes I hear myself saying things like, oh, that's really well said, Benny, but have you seen yourself in your life? Have you actually done this part? Have you actually? So it has, for me, and that's why I really enjoy writing about it, speaking about it, because it holds me accountable. So in a part, it's also a selfish thing for me to do, because when I speak to, for example, family and friends, or and my coachees, and then I'm just, oh yeah, I'm giving all this wise advice, I guess, and then I look at myself as like, okay, am I really applying this to my own life? So I've been far more stricter to myself in a good way, because, as I said, with the virtues of temperance and courage, and just all of them actually, and the practices, I do also, like every human being, we make mistakes and we slip up. But this has really made me feel more aware of, okay, you are, speaking your mind. You say that this is important to you as a person and as a lived philosophy, but are you actually doing it? So I have noticed that because of that, I hold myself more accountable, and I really try to apply it more and more. And then you see that it works. It's not easy, but you see, I've noticed again in my life that it does definitely work. And for me,
Hmm. Hmm. In terms of your emotional health or your actual decisions you're making, or both?
no, both, yeah. And
Yeah.
also,
Yeah.
like, for example, I was asked to teach the Stoic week in the Netherlands by a Dutch Stoic coach, and I've met him, and I was really surprised. Like, me, it's like, you want me to be there as a teacher? And that's where I really noticed that this practice is helping me, because first of all, I would have been terrified, nervous. I couldn't sleep. I would have not been able to sleep for months on end, right? But now, whenever I had those moments of dread, it's like, okay, let me just, this is still far away. Let I've got other things to focus on right now. And as I got closer, it's like, okay, are you still so worried? Then start working on it. Start doing things. Start putting things on paper. What are you thinking about? Put it somewhere so you can release that. But even during that week, which And I've been a teacher, but this is different, being in front of a group talking about a philosophy that is so important to you in your life. And then you get all these difficult questions because they were testing me, like they knew the other person better, so he was more of the authority and I was a new kid on the block. And I would have dealt with it in a completely different way years ago. And now I was kind of more, I felt myself actually being more of the observer and looking back at myself and saying, what's really going on here? How can I respond? And even if I do mess up somewhere, I'm doing the best that I can. And what are they really trying to ask from me? So that really helped me in that aspect to deal with these moments in life. And then you see this has value.
Yeah.
So it does help, but it is not easy, and you have to really commit to it in a certain way to also allow it to change. And one of the words that you mentioned about responsibility, that's one of the things that really changed my life, is from a quote, and it's oftentimes you can see it as a quote by Freud, but it's by someone else, McGee or something. It took me a long time to figure out who it actually was, but he said, most people don't want freedom because freedom requires taking responsibility, and people are afraid of responsibility. And that
Yes.
was me as well. I was like, am I taking responsibility for my life, or am I giving it away to other people? And once I'd made the decision, like, no, I want to live life this way, and then I need to make sure that I do it as well. And that's where it kind of changed me in an emotional aspect, because if I felt emotional about things, like, okay, what can I do about this? Why am I feeling this way, right? Really sitting with it, that's also scary for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But also just how I deal with other people, and so in all aspects, it's really given me more balance, and again, that peace of mind in my life. And I've noticed it in many different facets.
It's remarkable. And also makes me think about the burden of freedom, which is something I
Mm.
kind of had studied in existentialism, and it's in Dostoevsky, the brothers Karamazov, kind of that story within the story about the Grand Inquisitor. I was just talking with my daughter about that yesterday, and freedom is hard. I mean, if you believe you have freedom, you have to take responsibility for all those choices, and you have to kind of do the research to decide what you want to do, and then have the courage of your convictions and take a stand on something. And I've seen a lot of cases of folks not doing that, but I think it's really called for. And so it does call upon all of those virtues when you realize that you need the wisdom, you need the sense of kind of justice or fairness, and you need the courage. You need to be brave and actually make a choice, or take a stand, and not just kind of give that power to somebody else. And then you need to have that sort of patience and temperance. Things may not go how you want it to go, but you've done what you could, and you really can't control the outcome. So yeah, I
But
think about
yeah.
that quite a bit. Yeah, there's this idea about the Stoic archer that I love too,
Mm.
that I often talk with my kids about. Like, you're the archer, you're going to line it all up, you're doing great, but then you let the arrow go and the wind comes and takes or the range suddenly falls, or like someone comes along and moves the target. All of these things, and yeah, it's
or not being
really interesting.
or not being able to let go of the arrow at all, because
Yeah.
I've had people as well. It's like, oh, when do you actually let go of the arrow, right? And that's
Yes.
what people
Yes.
struggle with as well. And I think
Yes.
that's it's interesting when you're in the US, and I like the country, but when it's the land of the free, but what does freedom really mean, right?
What does it mean?
What does that concept mean? And that's
Yeah.
where people go wrong, and
Yeah.
wrong. That's where people have different ideas about what freedom really means.
Yeah.
And there
Yeah.
are responsibilities and duties connected to freedom, and the real kind of freedom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think about this a lot. Have you worked on your own sense of your life's purpose, and kind of, what, if you did, what went into that, or is it something you're still working on and thinking about?
Yeah, and I was thinking about that question as well, and I kind of go back to like Camus in that sense as well. But just, and like, is there really meaning? Like, what is my purpose? And because I think a lot of people, myself as well, especially when you're younger, you try to kind of work on your legacy. I want to leave something big behind. I want people to remember my name, and that's where it's so interesting with Marcus Aurelius, who says like, oh, 50 years, you'll be dead and everybody would have forgotten you. And funnily enough, 2000 years later, we're still reading his works, and he's so prevalent in our society, which is just ironic.
Yeah.
But I think for me, the purpose, and one of the other quotes from Marcus Aurelius, is just go out and be the best person you can be. And for me, that has been that has given me a lot of purpose, to just try to set an example of, okay, I want to be a good person and I want to share it with other people. So for me, it is difficult when people ask like, what should my purpose be? And I think, again, trying to maintain your character and soul as best as possible, and it might sound a little bit ethereal and thing, but that's really the crux of life. I think just trying to make sure that you are a good person, and that is a big purpose enough already, because you can influence so many people around you to be better, and you don't know who you're going to influence. If you like, I've seen that as a teacher, where I speak, I teach my class, and then the student comes up to me and says like, wow, that was really good, and I didn't even register that I said it, but they pick up on
Yeah.
things. So that's really important, of setting the right example. But I've been working on that for a long time, and even with something, creating Via Stoica, and trying to share the Stoic philosophy as best as I can to my abilities, and then ask like, okay, what is my purpose in this sense? And
Hmm.
again, as I said before, it helps me apply the philosophy better, because I kind of force myself to study it as best as I can. It helps me share it with as many people as I can, to hopefully inspire them at least to think about their own philosophy of life. But then as a bigger purpose in general, and then you go to like the existentialism and Camus, like, is there a really big purpose? I don't know. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. And as Marcus Aurelius says, as long as you live a good life, it doesn't really matter, right? If there is, then
Hmm.
you lived a good life. If there is a heaven, if you lived a good life, you're going to go there. If there isn't, then at least you've lived a good life. And
Right.
that's kind of what I'm trying to focus on.
Yeah, yeah, I like how you kind of boiled that down to its essence. And I also think that there's the process. We kind of lose that a lot of times, I think, in our culture. We always just think about the outcomes and what came out of it, what accomplishment did we get, and what, tangible thing did we achieve or build or purchase or whatever it is. But what I'm trying to do more is think about the process itself. And that's part of the reason I'm doing this podcast. And you were one of the people who inspired me to do this with your podcast, is that I think the process is really what matters. And maybe that also goes to my concept of the Stoic archer. The way I think about it is like, what matters is your process. You're trying to do this the way you have, you've done the work, you've put in time to train, and then you do the thing. And the outcome may not be what you expected or even wanted, but it's the process of that kind of self-training and building your ability to even shoot the arrow that I think should be celebrated by each of us, that we kind of know that we have it in us to do these things, and we try to do them, and who knows how they're going to really turn out. But if you don't even try, then what's the point? So I feel very, very strongly about that, and have had some conversations. Even I had an interesting conversations with Brittany Polat about this, who's another Stoic colleague and friend and writer. And some of this idea that in ancient philosophy, it's not the same as, for example, in utilitarianism, where it's about like do the greatest good for the greatest number or something like this. In a lot of ancient philosophy, my understanding, and I'm still studying, but my understanding is it's really about that character piece. The ethics is about how do we kind of work on ourselves, really, and bring this best version of ourselves and this best version of a flourishing human into the world. If you think that, if you agree with this Stoic goals of being pro-social and being in community with others and cosmopolitanism, then you're helping others by doing this, right? You're not just working yourself, you're also helping others and working in community with them. But anyway, these are some thoughts I've been having recently about kind of process versus outcomes.
I couldn't agree more. And I think we are so focused on the outcomes and that's what you see, right? If you, for example, an outcome would already be like to show a nice picture on Instagram, right? That's what people like, the outcome of, for a lot of people. And I found myself sometimes doing that. I don't really post a lot of my travels, and people tell me, oh, you should. But I don't really like to do that, because then sometimes it feels like you are going somewhere specifically to have a great picture, and then the outcome would be that people see how well you are doing your thing. So we are
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
focused on the outcome. Well, I love the analogy of traveling, because it is that journey that you're on, right? You go from one to B, and the experiences between that trip, that's really what makes it valuable and important. And instead of focusing on that, oh, I just want to have a great trip. Yeah, sometimes things go wrong, right? Sometimes things don't go as you plan, but those are the interesting stories afterwards you get to tell. And so I think that the process is something that we should put all the effort on, because
Yeah.
we can make a right decision, we can make a wrong decision, but both of them are valuable, right? The good one and the bad one, because we can then get more information, gain the knowledge, and improve. And one of the things that I liked from, for example, from Socrates, is that fact that he knew that he didn't know anything. And that's
Mm-hmm.
something like, and that's saying people don't do bad willingly, they do it out of ignorance of what the right thing to do is. And that kind of keeps me going. It's like, okay, I didn't know what the right thing to do was here, but now I
Mm,
know better. So next time I can use this, if I'm wise enough, and if I actually apply it and actually do it, I should be able to use this information to then be a little bit better than I was the last time. And I think that that's something that we should focus on more. But then again, we also need to define better what does successful and a good life means to us, because I think that
yes.
that's where we go wrong. And the Stoics, they just hammer on the sage figure, right? It's like, this is the person that you want to live up to, and people find it so abstract and perfect that it's not a correct goal. But if you tell people, oh, I can show you how to make $1 million, then they would love that. They just like, oh, here, you've got my money, I'll follow everything you do. And they think that that's going to solve their problem. So it is good to progress is the important thing, but you need to have the right goal to work towards as well. Because
Yes.
otherwise, if you're working towards something that is destructive, then you're making progress, but you're not doing it in the right way. So they are both important, but having that right goal and then working towards it just one step at a time. And people forget that that's an option, right? That's when you
Mm-hmm.
talk to people, it's like, you can get there. It's like, I can't, that's such a steep hill to climb. It's like, just start walking and start trying. And that's the key thing. And it'll help people build up their confidence to know that I can deal with things better and more than I used to think that I could.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, yeah. So much to think about here. I love this conversation. Just one or two more questions for you. Just this would be something I've thought about a lot lately too, and curious of your thoughts. Does your philosophy bring you joy?
Yeah, yeah. And then and again, those are the questions of like, what is joy? And for me, it's again that calm, right? It's that just being somewhere where you can just observe and take things in that's happening. Like, for example, I was at my parents' place, and I was helping them out in building a chicken coop. I don't know, I just end up building chicken coops everywhere. I built one with my friend, just something that keeps coming back. But when you are doing something, and I feel like doing something manual and with physically, because we are so much in our heads in the world, where we're just doing things online, and we're managing and doing this, but doing something physically and just focusing on a task like specifically, and then
Mm,
stepping back is like, wow, I did this. It gives you some of a feel of accomplishment, and I did something good for myself, right, to build it, but also for my family, for the people that I care about. And then you feel that peace of mind, that calm, is like, I'm doing the right thing. And obviously you have moments where you struggle, where you have fears and anxieties, but they are then taken away a little bit easier, because you know that you're doing something that you're supposed to be doing. And that's what with Stoic philosophy gives me, that even when I'm going through difficult times, it does give me that grounding to say, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Again, focus on the process. This is a difficult time, but you can get out of it. And even in those dark times, it gives me some peace of mind. And that's what I see as joy, when I just feel like,
mm,
okay, I'm kind of calm. I know who I am better than I did yesterday, and I'm working towards being a better, complete person. And then the things like, I wrote an article about what is the Stoic man, through like the meditations, just pretty much book one by Marcus Aurelius. And the words that popped out are compassion, kindness. And these are the ones that I never really practiced on myself. I was quite hard on myself. And that's something that I try to add to the conversation that I have, is okay, just be a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more kind to yourself. You're doing your best. And all of that combined really gives me, again, what I think is joy, just to kind of, yeah. And I'm a positive person who smiles a lot, and it has helped me do that a little bit more. I've noticed.
That's very powerful. I'm taking that to heart myself as well. Uh, Last question. Any advice for other people who are seeking to define their life philosophy or sense of purpose?
I just start with being curious and start looking around and seeing what life means to you, and asking the questions like, what are your goals, defining them. Are they really the goals that you are supposed to go after, or the different things that make you feel at peace and calm, and give that sense of the right direction, and really listen to that inner voice that you have, that inner diamond, right? I think having conversations with because I've made some of the biggest decisions with my instinct, just knowing that this is the right thing for me to do, without thinking about it. I did analyze it, but without overthinking it. So I think for me, the best thing is to really listen to yourself, investigate philosophies. I think philosophy is such an important part in how we can manifest the life that we want to live. Again, it can be Stoicism, it can be whatever philosophy that suits you best, but go out and undertake that journey. I think that's the beauty of life, is the experiment itself, right? And we try to think about having it all fixed and done, but what really is important is that discovery, that exploration. And we are inherently explorers, right? You see, like, we want to go out to the stars, we want to go to different places. I'm a traveler, but the biggest journey is the one that we have to make with ourselves, and that's also the scariest, but also the most beautiful one, I think.
That is beautifully put, and I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much, Benny, for joining me for this discussion. I am going to leave it feeling inspired, and I'm sure you're a fantastic coach. I'm hearing that curiosity come through and just all that you're bringing. So thank you for talking with me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I love the podcast, and it's great, doing it. I love the name, the Philosopher's Compass, and I'm looking forward to all the other episodes that you're going to have.
Well, I appreciate that so much. Thank you.